The rain had started as a whisper against the tall windows of the obsidian room, but now it drummed with insistence, each drop a tiny percussion against the glass. Victoria Sinclair barely noticed. Her feet throbbed with a dull ache that had long since become part of her existence. Her lower back burned with the familiar agony of standing for 14 hours straight, and her mind was already calculating whether tonight's tips would cover Lucas's dialysis payment this week, or if she would have to choose between her brother's life and the electricity bill again. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. Another text from Derek Shaw, the loan shark who owned her father's debt and therefore owned her fear. 1,000 by Sunday, or we visit again. The bruise on her ribs from his last visit still throbbed when she breathed too deeply. She had perfected this mask over 4 years of waitressing, the smile that never reached her gray-blue eyes, the posture that suggested she was delighted to be here, the voice that made every customer feel like they were her only concern in the world. Exhausting, this constant performance, but it kept Lucas alive, barely. The obsidian room sat in the heart of Tribeca, where power lunches stretched into power dinners, and the wine list cost more than Victoria's monthly rent for her crumbling studio in South Bronx, the one with no hot water and a lock that didn't quite work. She didn't belong here. Not really. The other servers had degrees from prestigious schools, spoke 3 languages, and saw this job as a stepping stone to something greater. Victoria saw it as a chain around her neck, each day adding another link. She caught her reflection in one of the restaurant's many mirrors. 23 years old, but looking closer to 40, the exhaustion carved into the hollows beneath her eyes, and the sharp angles of cheekbones that had become too prominent from skipping meals so Lucas could eat. Her black hair, pulled back in a practical ponytail, had lost its shine years ago. She had been beautiful once, or so her mother had told her before the cancer took her when Victoria was 12. Now she just looked haunted. This was her life now. Small, contained, surviving, but it hadn't always been this way. 4 years ago, she had dreams. Medical school, a residency at Mount Sinai, a future where she could heal people instead of watching them die. But dreams required money, and money required a father who didn't drink himself into gambling debts, who didn't take his grief out on her with his fists for 6 years after her mother's death, who didn't hang himself in the garage and leave her with $200,000 of debt to men who broke bones as casual reminders. The scholarship to Columbia vanished the day she had to drop out to care for Lucas when his kidneys began to fail. The savings disappeared into dialysis machines and hospital bills. The hope died somewhere between her father's funeral and the first time Derek Shaw's men cornered her in an alley and taught her what happened to people who missed payments. Marie Chen, the manager, appeared at her elbow. New table, section 4, the private booth. They just walked in, no reservation, but I couldn't say no. Her face was pale. Be careful with this group, Tori. Serve fast, don't ask questions, don't look too long. Victoria glanced toward section 4. A group of 5 men were settling into the corner booth, the most private table in the restaurant, the one usually reserved weeks in advance for clients whose names appeared in newspapers and whose faces appeared in nightmares. Even from across the room, Victoria could sense something different about them. They moved with controlled precision, their eyes constantly scanning the space, their body language suggesting they were predators, assessing territory rather than guests preparing to dine. The man at the center of the group caught her attention first. Mid-30s, dark hair styled with deliberate casualness, wearing a black 3-piece suit that fit him so perfectly it had to be custom-made. But it wasn't the expensive clothes that made Victoria's survival instincts scream. It was the way he carried himself. There was an authority in his posture, a quiet command that made the other men defer to him without words. Power radiated from him like gravity, bending everything around him toward his will. When his steel-gray eyes swept the room and paused on her for a fraction of a second, she felt her blood turn cold. This man was more dangerous than Derek Shaw and all his thugs combined. This man was the kind of danger that didn't threaten. It simply destroyed. She approached the table with her practiced smile, notepad ready. Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to the Obsidian Room. May I start you with something to drink? The man in the center looked up at her, and Victoria found herself meeting eyes that seemed to see everything. Her exhaustion, her fear, her secrets, not with the predatory interest some men showed her, but with the kind of assessment a chess master might give a piece he was deciding how to use. Macallan 30-year, he said. His voice was smooth, controlled, with the faintest trace of a New York accent beneath something older, something more dangerous. And water for the table. As she poured the whiskey for each of them, her trained eyes caught what others might miss. The youngest man at the table, barely 30, sat directly across from the leader. His hands trembled as they fidgeted with his napkin. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the restaurant's cool temperature. His eyes darted to the windows, to the door, anywhere but at the men surrounding him. Victoria had seen that look before, in the mirror, on her own face, during the years her father's fists taught her what fear truly meant. This man was terrified. Something was about to happen. Something that would shatter the careful walls she had built around her small, surviving life. She just didn't know it yet. If you're already hooked by Victoria's story, smash that like button and share this with someone who loves intense drama. Subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss what happens when she sees the red dot that changes everything. Because in the obsidian room, the most dangerous thing isn't the men in expensive suits. It's the moment a broken woman decides she has nothing left to lose. Victoria returned to the bar to retrieve the Macallan, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for the 30-year-old bottle on the highest shelf. She had served hundreds of VIP tables over the past 4 years, real estate tycoons, politicians with practiced smiles, Hollywood stars pretending at humility. Yet she had never felt like this before, as though the air around that table had thickened and grown heavier, as though every step drawing her closer was a step into a danger she could not name. She returned with the tray and placed a glass before each man, with a precision that had long since become instinct. As she leaned in to pour for the gray-haired man seated to the right of the leader, she caught his low, gravelly voice, just loud enough to reach her ears. "Did Anthony explain the shortfall?" The young man who was shaking, Anthony, swallowed so hard Victoria could see his throat bob. "I can explain, Mr. Thorne." So the leader was named Thorne. Victoria registered it without thinking, the same way she had learned to register everything during the years she had to read her father's moods to avoid his blows. She moved slowly around the table, pretending to check who needed water, her ears stretched tight as wire. $300,000. Thorne's voice did not rise, did not threaten, yet it was that calmness that sent a chill straight through her bones. 300,000 vanished from the account you manage, Anthony. And you want to explain. Anthony licked his lips, his eyes darting like a cornered animal searching for an escape. It was an investment. I thought I could double it before anyone noticed. I just need more time. Time. Thorne took a sip of whiskey, and Victoria noticed how the other men around the table fell silent, taut as strings about to snap. The gray-haired man, whom she guessed was Thorne's right hand, placed a hand on Anthony's shoulder with a show of friendliness, but Victoria saw how his fingers tightened, talons sinking into prey. "You know I do not forgive betrayal," Thorne said, still in the same tone one might use to discuss the weather. "But I hate stupidity even more. 300,000 is not the problem. The problem is that you thought you could outsmart me." Victoria set the water carafe down, fighting to keep her hands steady. She knew she should not be listening, should not be there, should not know these things, yet her body refused to move, as if her feet had been nailed to the polished wood floor. "Please, Mr. Thorne, I have a wife. I have children." Tears streamed down Anthony's face, and Victoria felt her chest tighten. She knew that feeling, begging a man with absolute power, knowing the plea was meaningless, yet begging because there was nothing else left to do. "Your family will be taken care of," Thorne said, and there was nothing comforting in the words. Victoria's stomach turned. She pivoted to leave, but in that moment her gaze collided with Thorne's steel-gray eyes. He was looking at her, not with anger for overhearing, but with something she could not read, as if he were assessing her, weighing her, deciding whether she was a threat or merely an insignificant detail. "You can bring us the menus," he said, his composure flawless, "and give us 10 minutes of privacy." Victoria nodded, barely trusting her own voice. She turned and walked away, feeling his gaze burning into the back of her neck. Only when she was far enough did she dare to breathe, realizing she had been holding it for a full minute. Something was terribly wrong at that table, and every cell in Victoria's body was screaming at her to stay away, to pretend she had seen nothing, heard nothing, known nothing. But fate had other plans for her. 10 minutes passed like 10 hours as Victoria stood behind the bar, pretending to arrange crystal glasses while her eyes never left the shadowed corner table. She saw Anthony Russo bow his head, his shoulders shaking in uneven bursts, while the other men sat perfectly still, like carved stone statues. Thorne said something too soft for her to hear from that distance, but the way Anthony nodded again and again like a marionette with snapped strings told her the interrogation was far from over. Marie Chen touched her elbow and asked whether they had ordered yet, and Victoria shook her head and said they wanted privacy. "Then let them have it," Marie replied, her voice tight. "But do not keep them waiting too long. Men like that do not like to wait." Victoria drew in a deep breath and returned to the table with the leather-bound menus. She set them down silently, careful not to look at Anthony's face slick with sweat and tears. Thorne gave her a brief nod, a gesture that acknowledged her presence without truly seeing her. She cleared the empty glasses, moving around the table with the caution of someone walking on thin ice. As she leaned past Thorne's shoulder to take his glass, the chandelier light reflected against the wide window, and she saw it, a tiny red dot, no larger than the tip of a toothpick, drifting slowly across the pristine white collar of Thorne's shirt, directly over his jugular. Time froze. Victoria had watched enough films, read enough books, lived long enough in fear to know exactly what that red dot meant. A targeting laser, a sniper, someone aiming at this man from beyond the glass. 1,000 thoughts tore through her mind in a fraction of a second. This was not her business. This man was dangerous. This man could be a killer. She should pretend she saw nothing. She should walk away and let fate decide. But her body moved before her mind could stop it. 4 years of serving tables had trained her reflexes. 6 years of surviving her father's abuse had taught her to act on instinct, and 23 years of staying alive had taught her that sometimes a single second decides an entire life. "Get down!" she screamed, her voice ripping through the refined hush of the restaurant as she lunged toward Thorne. She shoved him out of his chair with all the strength in her slender body, and they crashed to the floor at the exact moment the bullet shattered the window. The sound of breaking glass rang like crystal in a nightmare. Victoria felt sharp fragments rain down her back like hail, felt Thorne's hot breath against her face, felt her heart pounding so violently she thought it might burst from her chest. She was lying atop the New York Mafia boss, her face only a few centimeters from his. Chaos erupted around them, customers screaming, chairs overturning, footsteps scattering, the metallic snap of guns drawn by bodyguards. The gray-haired man rushed forward to shield Thorne, weapon raised toward the broken window. Anthony Russo curled beneath the table, sobbing like a child. Yet amid all that madness, Thorne did not move. He lay still beneath Victoria, steel-gray eyes locked on hers with something she could not define. Surprise, curiosity, and something deeper still, as if he were seeing her for the first time, truly seeing her, not as an invisible server, but as a human being who had placed her own life between him and death. "You just saved my life," he said, his voice unnervingly calm amid the screams. Victoria did not know how to respond. She only knew that her life had just changed forever, and there was no way back. The gray-haired man moved with astonishing speed for his age, and within seconds, he hauled Victoria off Thorne and shoved her behind a granite column, while 2 other bodyguards formed a human shield around their boss, guns drawn from their holsters, barrels aimed in every direction, eyes sweeping the restaurant like hunting eagles. Customers screamed and fled toward the exits, crashing into one another in blind panic. A woman in a red dress fell hard to the floor, her high heels flying off, yet no one stopped to help her. The waitstaff pressed themselves against the walls, faces drained of color like wax figures. Victoria spotted Marie Chen trembling behind the register, a phone clamped to her ear, likely calling the police. Thorne rose with a calm so unnatural it was unsettling, brushing shards of glass from his suit jacket as if he had merely stumbled, rather than narrowly escaped an assassination. He murmured something to the gray-haired man, too softly for Victoria to hear, and the man nodded before disappearing through the back door with 2 other guards. Anthony Russo remained curled beneath the table, and Victoria noticed one of the remaining bodyguards hauling him up with no trace of gentleness. Then Thorne turned toward her. He walked to where Victoria stood, his steps steady as though the floor were not littered with glass, as though the bullet had never existed at all. When he stopped in front of her, Victoria realized he was nearly a head taller than she was, and the closeness made her feel smaller than she ever had before. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice still even, though the intensity in his steel-gray eyes made it impossible for her to look away. "Victoria," she heard her own voice rasp. "Victoria Sinclair. Victoria Sinclair," he repeated, tasting each syllable. "You just saved my life." Victoria did not know what to say. She had acted on instinct, without thought or calculation. And now, standing before the most powerful man she had ever encountered, she began to wonder whether she had done the right thing or made the greatest mistake of her life. "Do you know who I am?" Thorne asked. Victoria shook her head, even though she had heard the name Thorne from Anthony's lips, even though her instincts had been screaming that this man was more dangerous than anyone she had ever met. "I am Marcus Thorne," he said, and the name landed like a sentence. "And you, Victoria Sinclair, have just created a debt. I always repay my debts, one way or another." Before Victoria could react, the wail of police sirens cut through the night outside. Red and blue lights flashed through the shattered window as 2 patrol cars screeched to a halt in front of the restaurant. Marcus Thorne showed no sign of concern. He merely nodded to one of his guards, who stepped outside with a phone pressed to his ear. Victoria stood there watching it all unfold as if trapped in a surreal dream. The police entered, but instead of handcuffs and interrogation, they spoke to Thorne's bodyguards with a respect that felt deeply wrong. One call was made, then another, and within 15 minutes the officers left with hurried notes and promises to follow up later. No one asked Victoria a single question. No one requested her statement. It was as if she did not exist, as if everything that had happened that night would vanish from every official record. That was the moment Victoria truly understood who she was facing. Marcus Thorne was not just a boss. He was a force, a dark shadow cast over the entire city, and she had just stepped into his world. Victoria had no time to protest as 2 bodyguards gently but firmly guided her out of the restaurant through the back door. A sleek black SUV waited in the alley, engine running, headlights dark. She glanced back at the obsidian room one last time and saw Marie Chen standing in the doorway, her expression caught between worry and relief, as if she was grateful that Victoria was alive, yet equally relieved that she was leaving with her trouble. Marcus Thorne was already seated inside the vehicle, the dim glow of the overhead light carving sharp lines into his angular face and making his steel-gray eyes seem even colder. Victoria was eased into the seat opposite him. The door slammed shut, and the SUV surged into the rainy Manhattan night before she could utter a single word. "I need to go home," Victoria said, forcing her voice to stay steady while her heart hammered wildly in her chest. "My brother is waiting for me. I have a morning shift tomorrow." Marcus did not look at her. He was scrolling through his phone, the blue light washing over his face like a cold moon. "Your brother, Lucas Sinclair, 19 years old, stage 4 chronic kidney disease, currently undergoing dialysis 3 times a week at Mount Sinai. His bills are 3 months overdue, totaling $47,000. The blood drained from Victoria's face. "You." The apartment in South Bronx, 5th floor, no elevator, no hot water, the front door lock broken since last month because you could not afford to fix it. "You have worked at the Obsidian Room for 4 years, before that at O'Malley's Bar in Queens, and before that at Mrs. Nguyen's laundromat in Chinatown." He finally looked up, and his gaze pinned her in place like twin steel needles. "Derek Shaw, your father's creditor, has threatened you 17 times over the past 6 months. The last time, 3 weeks ago, 2 of his men beat you in the alley behind Mount Sinai, breaking a rib you never had treated because you did not have the money." Victoria felt as though she were being stripped bare in the middle of a crowded street. Every secret she had tried to hide, every pain she had swallowed, every humiliation she had endured in silence was laid out before this man like a dry, clinical report. She hated the feeling, hated the helplessness, hated that someone could know everything about her while she knew nothing about him. "You investigated me," she said, her voice shaking not with fear but with anger. "In 1 hour, you tore my life apart." "You saved my life," Marcus replied, as if that explained everything. "I needed to know who you were, whether you were part of the plot or just a waitress with fast reflexes." "I am the second option," Victoria answered bitterly. "A poor waitress drowning in debt with a sick brother. Not worth your concern." Marcus tilted his head, and for the first time Victoria saw something different in his eyes. Not cold calculation, but genuine curiosity. "You knew what that red dot was. You could have pretended not to see it. You could have walked away and let me die, but you did not. Why?" Victoria was silent. She did not know why. Perhaps because she had seen too much death in her life. Her mother on a hospital bed, her father in a warehouse, her own hope dying a little more each day. Perhaps because she did not want another death on her conscience, no matter who the man was. "I do not know," she finally admitted. "I just acted." Marcus nodded slowly, as though that answer satisfied him more than any carefully crafted explanation ever could. "You cannot go home tonight, Victoria. Whoever tried to kill me saw your face. You saw theirs. That makes you a witness, and witnesses do not live long in my world." The SUV came to a stop before a towering building in Midtown, its glass facade reflecting the city lights like millions of stars. Victoria looked up toward the top, where Marcus Thorne's penthouse waited, and understood that she had no choice. She never had. Marcus Thorne's penthouse sat on the 63rd floor, And when the elevator doors slid open, Victoria felt as though she were stepping into an entirely different world. Black marble floors gleaming beneath her feet, reflecting the warm golden light of crystal chandeliers suspended from a soaring ceiling, floor-to-ceiling glass revealing all of Manhattan spread out below, millions of lights flickering like stars fallen to the earth. The apartment was larger than the entire floor of the building where Victoria lived, and it struck her that a single month of rent here could erase all her debt and still leave enough to give Lucas a kidney transplant. Marcus entered behind her, shrugged off his suit jacket still dusted with shards of glass, and tossed it onto a cream-colored leather sofa. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey from a crystal decanter at the bar and held one out to her. She did not take it. She told him she did not drink while talking to a man who could kill her at any moment, her voice harder than she intended. Marcus studied her briefly and set the glass down. He said that if he had wanted her dead, she would not have survived the car ride. He sat across from her, hands resting on his knees, the posture of a man preparing to negotiate. He told her he had a proposition for her, calling her by her full name, Victoria Sinclair. She remained standing, refusing to sit even though her legs ached after 14 hours on her feet, unwilling to place herself at any further disadvantage before a man who had held all the power long before she walked into his life. He began calmly, like someone reciting contract terms, telling her he would settle the $200,000 debt owed to Derek Shaw, that he would cover all of Lucas's medical expenses, including the overdue dialysis bills and the transplant itself. He paused, letting the words sink in, then said he had a contact on the waiting list, and that Lucas could receive a kidney within 2 months instead of 2 years. Victoria's heart missed a beat, 2 months echoing in her mind, 2 months until her brother might be free of the dialysis machine, draining the life from him, able to return to university, able to reclaim a future the illness had stolen. She wanted to cry, wanted to fall to her knees and beg, but she had learned long ago that nothing came free in this world, especially from powerful men. She asked what he wanted in return, her voice rough. Marcus met her gaze and told her she would stay by his side until he uncovered who was behind the attempted assassination that night, as an advisor. She could not hide her skepticism, pointing out that she was a waitress and knew nothing of his world. He replied that she knew how to read people, that she had seen Anthony Russo's fear before anyone else had, that she had noticed the laser dot when an entire room had missed it, that she possessed observant eyes, and in his world, eyes like hers were worth more than guns. Victoria turned away and stared out at the dark sweep of Manhattan, thinking of Lucas, of his exhausted eyes after every dialysis session, of the way he forced a smile for her while his body failed him, thinking of Derek Shaw, of the fear that woke her every night, of the beatings she endured in silence with no one to turn to, thinking of her father, her mother, and everything already lost. She said slowly that if she agreed, she would not belong to him, she would not kill, would not break the law, would not share his bed. Marcus agreed instantly, to her surprise, and when she turned back to face him, she added that she would be allowed to see Lucas whenever she wished, and that once he found the assassin, she would be free. Marcus rose and stepped toward her, stopping just 1 pace away, so close she had to tilt her head to meet his eyes, close enough to smell whiskey and sandalwood, to notice a faint scar running from his temple down his right cheek. He gave her his word, and said he always kept it. Victoria drew a deep breath, knowing she was striking a bargain with the devil, knowing it clearly, but the devil was offering to save her brother's life, and that was a price she was willing to pay. She said yes, and in that single word burned every road back behind her. The next morning, Victoria woke in a room she did not recognize, the sheets soft as clouds, the pillows so plush she felt as if she were floating on air, and pale morning sunlight pouring through sheer silk curtains like liquid gold. It took her several seconds to remember where she was, and when the memories of the night before came crashing back, she jolted upright as if shocked by electricity. There was a gentle yet firm knock at the door, and before Victoria could answer, it opened, and a woman stepped inside, about 32 years old, with neatly cropped brown hair, wearing a dark gray suit and a white blouse buttoned to the collar, a tablet tucked under her arm, her gaze sharp but not unkind. She introduced herself as Diana Cross, Marcus Thorne's personal assistant, her voice clear and efficient, wasting not a single word, and told Victoria that Mr. Thorne had tasked her with helping her adjust to her new life, that she had 15 minutes to shower and get dressed, and that the wardrobe in the dressing room to the left contained clothing in her exact size. Victoria almost asked how they knew her size, but then remembered Marcus had unraveled her life in a single hour, and the question felt pointless. She stepped into the bathroom and nearly cried at the sight of a marble bathtub large enough for 4 people, a shower with dozens of spray settings, and bottles of shampoo and conditioner she had only ever seen in magazines, each costing hundreds of dollars. Hot water, Victoria thought as she stepped under the spray. Real hot water, not the lukewarm trickle from her South Bronx apartment. And she stood there longer than necessary, letting it wash away 4 years of exhaustion, if only for a moment. The wardrobe in the dressing room overwhelmed her. Dozens of dresses, blouses, and trousers, all designer labels she knew only from behind Fifth Avenue shop windows. She chose the simplest outfit, a white silk blouse and black slacks, yet even this felt softer and fit better than anything she had ever worn. Diana guided her through the penthouse, explaining each area with the precision of a museum curator: the main living room, the dining room, Marcus's office, which she was not to enter without invitation, the gym, the indoor pool, the library, each room larger than Victoria's entire apartment, until the sheer luxury began to feel suffocating. They were in the dining room when laughter drifted in from the doorway, and Victoria turned to see a young man enter, about 28 years old, with the same dark hair and facial structure as Marcus, but softer, more approachable, a smile that reached his eyes, something Victoria had never seen on Marcus. He stepped up to her and extended his hand, introducing himself as Julian Thorne, the younger brother of the unfeeling rock she had risked her life to protect. And Victoria shook his hand, surprised by the warmth of his grip and his gaze. She gave her name, Victoria Sinclair, and he laughed lightly, saying he knew, that all of Marcus's world knew about her after last night, that she had been the sole topic of every morning meeting. He tilted his head, studying her with friendly curiosity, saying she was not what he had imagined, that he had pictured the woman who saved Marcus's life as some kind of Amazon warrior, not a thin waitress who looked like she had not slept properly in 4 years. And Victoria finished the sentence for him in a dry tone. Julian laughed out loud, told her he liked her and that she had a spine, then turned to Diana and told her to take very good care of Victoria, adding that anyone who made his brother look at them for more than 3 seconds deserved to be treated like royalty. Victoria stood there watching Julian walk away, feeling more out of place than ever, knowing she did not belong in this world of penthouses and expensive clothes, of men who spoke of hundreds of thousands of dollars as if they were loose change. Yet she had agreed, and now she would have to live with her choice. That afternoon, Victoria was driven to Mount Sinai with 2 bodyguards at her side, and she felt a strange dissonance as she stepped out of the sleek black SUV at the hospital entrance, the same place she had come hundreds of times by subway with aching feet and plastic bags of cheap groceries, now flanked by 2 large men in black suits who moved like silent shadows, and she noticed the way people stepped aside, the way hospital staff glanced at her and quickly looked away. A sensation she was not used to, being noticed, deferred to, feared simply because of who walked beside her. Yet all of those thoughts dissolved the moment she reached the 12th floor and realized Lucas was no longer in the shared ward. A nurse guided her into the VIP wing, where each room was the size of a small apartment, with windows overlooking Central Park, electronic hospital beds, and state-of-the-art machines she had only ever seen in movies. Lucas was propped against his pillows, thin and pale as always, but his eyes lit up when he saw her. "Tori," he called, his voice weak but brimming with joy, saying she had come, that they told him she would, but he had not believed them, asking if she had seen the room, pointing out the television, the private refrigerator, the food that actually tasted good instead of watery porridge like in the old room. Victoria wrapped her arms around her brother, feeling his ribs jutting beneath the hospital gown, and she had to fight not to break down right then. Lucas was 19, yet he looked 15, illness having stolen his youth and vitality, leaving behind a frail boy with ashen skin and eyes too large for his hollowed face. He asked if she was all right, pulling back to look at her, saying they told him she was working for someone important, and asking whether that person treated her well. Victoria nodded, barely trusting her own voice, unsure how to explain Marcus Thorne, the assassination attempt, the bargain she had made, knowing Lucas did not need to carry those burdens. He only needed to heal. The door opened, and a man in a white coat entered with 2 nurses, and Victoria recognized him as the head nephrologist she had met many times before, a man who had never truly looked her in the eye when she was just the relative of a poor patient unable to pay his bills, yet today he regarded her with a wholly different respect. He addressed her as Miss Sinclair, his tone warmer than she had ever heard, and told her he had good news, that they had found a suitable kidney source for Lucas, that all tests were compatible, and that if nothing changed, surgery could be performed within 6 weeks. Victoria felt her knees weaken and she gripped the side of Lucas's bed, her heart racing, her ears ringing as though the doctor had spoken in another language. 6 weeks, she whispered. But the waiting list, they said at least 2 years. The doctor explained that a benefactor had intervened, and Victoria immediately understood who that benefactor was, adding that all costs had been covered, including surgery and post-operative care, and that Lucas would receive the best treatment available. Victoria could not hold back anymore. She cried, for the first time in years, not from pain but from relief, tears sliding down her cheeks and falling onto Lucas's hand as he clutched hers, crying too without fully understanding what was happening. For the first time since her mother died, Victoria felt hope, real hope, not the fragile kind she forced herself to believe in each day, just to survive. And she knew that whoever Marcus Thorne truly was, no matter how dark his world might be, she would carry a debt to him forever for this. 3 days later, Victoria witnessed something she wished she had never seen. That night she could not sleep, the nightmares about her father returning as they always did, and she wandered through the darkened penthouse in search of a glass of water. As she passed the corridor leading to Marcus's office, she heard voices drifting from a door left slightly ajar. She knew she should not stop, should not look, yet the instincts of curiosity and survival she had honed over so many years nailed her feet to the floor. Through the narrow opening, Victoria saw Anthony Russo kneeling on the ground, his hands bound behind his back, his face swollen and bruised, blood running from his nose and the corners of his mouth, dripping onto the expensive Persian rug. Victor Kane stood behind Anthony, one hand resting on his shoulder like a silent reminder of what would happen if he tried to run. Marcus sat behind his desk, leaning back in his chair, steel-gray eyes fixed on Anthony with the detached calm of someone observing an insect about to be crushed. "So you admit it," Marcus said, his voice filling the suffocating silence of the room, "that you were the one who leaked my schedule to Vega." Anthony sobbed, the broken crying of a man who knew his fate had already been sealed, saying they had threatened his family, his wife, his children, that they would kill them all if he did not cooperate, that he had no choice. "You had a choice," Marcus replied, his voice cold as ice. "You could have come to me. You could have told the truth. I would have protected your family. But you chose another path. You chose betrayal." Victoria saw Anthony begin to tremble even harder, his head bowing as if he had surrendered the last shred of hope. He begged Marcus to remember that he had served the family for 12 years, that his father had served Marcus's father, pleading for mercy. "I'm thinking of that," Marcus answered, and Victoria caught something in his tone. Not anger, but a deep, weary disappointment. "And it is precisely because of that I am giving you the chance to say your last words." Anthony looked up, desperation burning in his eyes as he searched Marcus's face for any hint of compassion. But there was none. Marcus's features were carved from stone. Unmoved. "My wife and children," Anthony whispered. "Please do not touch them." "I do not harm innocent women and children," Marcus said. "They will be taken care of. But you." He did not finish the sentence. He merely gave a small nod, so subtle it was almost invisible, but Victor Kane understood. Victoria saw the gray-haired man tighten his grip on Anthony's shoulder, and then the two of them disappeared through the back door of the office. She did not see what happened next, but she did not need to. Victoria staggered back, her spine hitting the corridor wall, her heart pounding so violently she thought the entire penthouse could hear it. She had just witnessed a death sentence delivered and carried out with a single nod. No court, no lawyers, no appeal, only Marcus Thorne and his absolute power. "You should not be here." Marcus's voice sounded directly behind her, making Victoria nearly scream in shock. She spun around to find him standing in the doorway of his office, the light behind him casting his figure into a dark silhouette like a demon. She stammered, saying she had not meant to be there, that she had only been passing by, her composure finally shattering after years of hard control. Marcus stepped toward her, and Victoria retreated until her back pressed against a painting on the wall. He stopped when he was only 1 step away, his steel-gray eyes looking down at her with an expression she could not decipher. "You are afraid of me," he said, not as a question. Victoria swallowed hard and told him he had just ordered someone killed. "I just dealt with a traitor who nearly cost me my life," Marcus replied without the slightest tremor in his voice. "There is no place for betrayal in my world, Victoria, and if you stay here long enough, you will have to accept that." Victoria looked at him. The man who had saved her brother, who had paid off the debt that had crushed her for 4 years, who had given her hope for the first time in so long, and who had also just ended a man's life with a simple nod of his head, and she no longer knew what she was supposed to feel. 1 week had passed since the night Victoria witnessed Anthony Russo's fate, and she tried to drive the image from her mind. Yet every time she saw Marcus, she remembered that cold nod, remembered how a human life could be decided in an instant. So she avoided him whenever she could, eating breakfast alone in her room, spending most of her time at the hospital with Lucas, or reading in the library. But no matter how carefully she kept her distance, Marcus's presence still hung over the penthouse like a ghost that could not be banished. On the 8th night, the nightmare returned, and Victoria found herself standing in the warehouse behind her childhood home at 18 years old, staring up at her father hanging from a crossbeam, his eyes wide open and fixed on her with a bitterness death itself could not erase, and she woke with a scream trapped in her throat, her back drenched in sweat, her heart pounding like a terrified animal. She could not stay in the room. The walls felt too close, the ceiling too low, the air too thick, and she needed to move, to breathe, to feel something that reminded her she was still alive, that nightmares were only nightmares. She wandered barefoot through the dark penthouse, the marble floor icy beneath her feet, city light from the vast windows casting pale streaks across the stone like a map of a world she did not yet belong to, passing the living room and the dining area, until she stopped at the faint glow spilling from a small room at the end of the corridor she had never entered. She knew she should turn back, knew she had already learned the cost of wandering at night and seeing things she was never meant to see. But her feet did not obey, and she stepped to the half-open door and looked inside. Marcus sat in a worn armchair, the only thing in the penthouse that did not look expensive. No suit jacket this time, just a white shirt unbuttoned at the collar and black trousers, a small framed photograph in his hands, and the look in his eyes as he studied it was nothing like the cold steel gaze Victoria knew. There was pain there, deep and old, like a scar long healed, that still ached on rainy nights. He told her she could come in without lifting his eyes, and she startled at the realization that he knew she was there, stammering an apology, saying she had not meant to intrude, and he cut her off gently, telling her he knew, and that she could not sleep either. After a moment's hesitation, Victoria stepped inside, the room far smaller than the others, its walls crowded with old photographs and shelves of worn leather-bound books, the only place in the lavish apartment that carried the weight of memory and the marks of a past. She sat in the chair across from him and waited in silence, and after a long moment, Marcus handed her the frame. Victoria took it and saw a family of 4, parents and 2 sons. The father with the same gray eyes and hard lines as Marcus, the mother beautiful with a gentle smile, and 2 boys grinning openly, one about 16 and the other about 8, and she recognized Marcus in the older boy and Julian in the younger. Marcus said it was the last photograph they ever took together, his voice low and distant, and that 3 weeks later his father was shot dead right in front of him. Victoria looked up, unsure what to say, and Marcus continued, spitting the name Salvatore Vega like poison, explaining that Vega had been his father's closest friend, the man his father trusted most, that he came to their house one Saturday night, laughed with his father, drank with him, then pulled a gun and shot him 3 times in the chest while his father's back was turned, pouring more whiskey. He paused, and Victoria saw his hand tighten on the arm of the chair until his knuckles went white, saying he had been 16. Standing on the stairs, watching his father fall, watching Vega step over the body and walk out as if nothing had happened, unable to move, able only to watch. Victoria asked softly about his mother, and Marcus replied that she could not bear it, that she died a year later, the doctors calling it a heart attack, though he knew her heart had simply broken because she had loved his father more than her own life. Silence settled between them, heavy with everything left unsaid, and Victoria looked at the man before her, the powerful and ruthless mafia boss, and for the first time she saw him as he truly was, a 16-year-old boy who had lost everything and been forced to rebuild himself from the ashes. She said quietly that she understood, and she truly did, telling him he did not need to explain why he had become who he was. And Marcus looked at her then, the steel in his eyes softening just a fraction, and said she was the first person to say that and be believed. Victoria did not know what made her speak. Perhaps it was the warm, contained silence of the small room. Perhaps it was the way Marcus had just laid his own wounds bare before her without pretense. Perhaps it was because for the first time in many years she felt she was speaking to someone who truly understood what pain meant. And she told him that her mother died when she was 12, breast cancer, that her mother fought it for 2 years, but in the end it won, that Victoria sat by her bedside in those final days, holding her hand until it grew cold, and she paused, swallowing the tight knot in her throat, while Marcus said nothing, offered no hollow comfort, only listened with an intensity that made every word she spoke feel seen. She said her father could not survive it, that he loved her mother. She knew that, but he did not know how to grieve without destroying everything around him, that he began to drink, then gamble, and one day he looked at Victoria and saw her mother's face reflected in her own, and he hated it, and she stared down at her hands, fingers twisted together, as if trying to hold something from shattering. She told him the first beating came on her 13th birthday, that he was drunk and she accidentally broke her mother's glass, that he hit her so badly she could not go to school for 3 days and told her teacher she had fallen down the stairs, and she gave a small, joyless laugh, then said 6 years. Mr. Thorne, 6 years she lived in that house, learning to read her father's moods, to know when to hide, learning to endure pain in silence, learning to cover bruises and lie to the world that everything was fine. And Lucas, her younger brother, she had to protect him from all of it, that he never knew what their father did to her, she made sure of that. Marcus remained silent, but Victoria saw his jaw tighten, and something in his eyes that looked like rage held tightly in check. She said that one day, when she was 18, she came home and found her father in the shed, her voice reduced to a whisper, that he had hanged himself, leaving a note saying he was not sorry to her, not sorry to Lucas, not sorry for 6 years of hell, not sorry for the $200,000 debt to men who would not hesitate to break her bones if she was late by a single day. Tears ran down Victoria's cheeks, and she did not bother to wipe them away. She was tired of hiding, tired of pretending to be strong, tired of carrying everything alone, and she told him that for 4 years, she did everything she could to pay the debt and keep Lucas alive, that she gave up her medical scholarship, gave up every dream, gave up even hope, that she simply existed one day at a time, waiting for it all to end. Marcus stood, and Victoria thought he would leave her there with the wreckage of what she had just revealed. But instead he sat down beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body, and he asked her what she thought he saw when he looked at her, his voice low and gentler than she had ever heard it, and she shook her head. He told her he saw a woman who had been knocked down by life again and still stood back up, that he saw a sister who sacrificed everything to protect her brother, that he saw someone who noticed a red laser on a stranger's chest and chose to save him without a single reason to do so, and he turned to her, and in his steel-gray eyes Victoria saw a respect she had never been given before. He told her she was stronger than she thought, stronger than many people he knew, and that she did not have to be alone anymore. And Victoria cried then without restraint, and when Marcus placed a hand on her shoulder, a small gesture heavy with meaning, she felt something shift inside her, as if a wall she had spent years building was finally beginning to crack. 2 weeks after that night, Marcus informed Victoria that she would accompany him to a charity event at the Plaza Hotel, and she wanted to refuse, but Diana Cross had already prepared a midnight blue evening gown whose price Victoria knew equaled an entire year of rent in her old apartment, explaining in a tone that allowed no argument that Victoria needed to be seen at Mr. Thorne's side so people would know she was protected and enemies would understand she was not an easy target. And when Victoria stood before the mirror in the silk gown clinging to her body, she barely recognized herself. Her hair swept up to reveal the graceful line of her neck, soft makeup hiding the dark circles beneath her eyes, and for the first time in years, she did not look like an exhausted waitress. She looked like she belonged to this world. The plaza glowed beneath crystal chandeliers, hundreds of guests in expensive formal wear moving through the grand hall like peacocks displaying their feathers, and Victoria entered beside Marcus, her hand resting on his arm as Diana had instructed, feeling every gaze turn toward them as whispers rippled through the room like waves, catching fragments of her name paired with words like waitress and saved his life and new lover, and she kept her face composed even as everything inside her screamed to flee. Marcus leaned close and murmured that she was doing well and that only a few more hours remained, his warm breath brushing her skin, and they moved through the crowd as Marcus paused to shake hands and exchange brief words with men who looked important, while Victoria stood beside him like a decorative statue, smiling when required, silent when necessary. Then she appeared, a woman around 29 years old with long black hair flowing like a dark river, brown eyes, sharp as knives, dressed in a crimson gown as vivid as blood, approaching them with a smile that never reached her eyes, and Victoria immediately sensed the danger radiating from her. She addressed Marcus with a voice sweet as honey, laced with poison. remarking how long it had been, and how she had heard he nearly died in an assassination, adding that it was a pity it had failed, and Marcus replied with icy calm, calling her Nina, and saying he had not expected her father to be bold enough to let her show her face there. Nina Castellano gave a soft laugh, and then turned her openly contemptuous gaze on Victoria, asking if this was the little bird New York could not stop buzzing about, the girl who saved the great Marcus Thorne's life. Stepping closer so the scent of expensive perfume filled Victoria's senses, and remarking that she had imagined someone more impressive, not a skinny waitress with the eyes of a frightened mouse. Victoria felt heat rise in her face, not from shame but from resolve, having endured far worse insults from her father, from Derek Shaw, from drunken patrons over 4 years of waiting tables, and she answered calmly, as if commenting on the weather, that at least she was not the daughter of a man who hired assassins to kill former allies, adding that it must be difficult to live with betrayal running in one's blood. Nina's eyes flashed with fury, and her hand clenched into a fist as she snapped back that Victoria knew nothing of her family or that world, and was merely a lucky girl Marcus had taken in out of pity. And Victoria did not step back even when Nina stood close enough for her to count the false lashes, replying that perhaps that was true, but at least she was not the rejected one, noting she had heard Nina had once been promised to Mr. Thorne before her father decided to murder his, and calling it a shame. Nina's face went white with rage, and she raised her hand as if to strike, but Marcus's hand caught her wrist before it could touch Victoria, his voice so cold the air itself seemed to freeze as he told her that was enough, that she stood on his territory and was not to touch his people. And Nina yanked her hand free, her glare drilling into Victoria with pure hatred as she whispered that they would regret it, both of them, before turning and vanishing into the crowd. Victoria realized she was trembling, not with fear but with adrenaline, and Marcus placed a steadying hand on her back, warmth seeping through the thin fabric of her gown as he quietly told her she had done well, adding that she had just made a dangerous enemy. And Victoria looked toward where Nina had disappeared and replied that she already had enough enemies and one more changed nothing at all. 3 days after the event at the plaza, Marcus summoned Victoria to his office, and this was the first time she was invited into the room formally, not glimpsed by accident through a cracked door like the night Anthony Russo was dealt with. Victor Kane stood beside Marcus, holding a thick file, and when he looked at Victoria, there was something in his eyes that resembled sympathy, something she had never seen in the normally impenetrable man. Marcus told her to sit, his tone more serious than usual, saying there were things she needed to know, and as Victoria took the chair opposite his desk, her heart began to race, a quiet instinct warning her that what she was about to hear would not be good news. Marcus slid the file toward her, and she opened it with slightly trembling hands. Inside were photographs, documents, and detailed records. An image of Derek Shaw shaking hands with an older man Victoria recognized from the photographs Marcus had once shown her, Salvatore Vega, images of her old apartment in South Bronx taken from a distance as if someone had been watching, photographs of her going to work, coming home, visiting Lucas at the hospital, hundreds of images stretching back over 4 years. Marcus said that Derek Shaw was not just an ordinary loan shark, that he was Vega's man, and that her father's debt, the beatings she endured, the years of suffering had all been orchestrated, his voice cold and metallic. Victoria felt the blood drain from her face and asked what he meant by orchestrated, and Victor Kane explained in a steady, low voice that her father had not fallen into debt by chance, that Vega had sent people to approach him, lure him into gambling, and push him deeper into debt, and that after her father died, Vega ordered Shaw to continue watching her and her brother. Victoria whispered why, her voice breaking, asking why they would do this to her when she had nothing to do with that world. And Marcus looked at her with pain in his steel-gray eyes, telling her it was because her father had once worked for his own father before she was born, that he had been an accountant who knew too many secrets, and when Marcus's father died, Vega wanted to make sure no one in her family could ever become a threat, and instead of killing them outright, he chose something more cruel, destroying them slowly. Victoria sprang to her feet, the file slipping from her hands, photographs scattering across the floor as she struggled to breathe, realizing that the 4 years of suffering she had endured, every beating from Derek Shaw's men, every night she cried over unpaid debts, had not been fate at all, but a design crafted by a man whose name she had not even known until weeks ago. She said they had watched her for 4 years, her voice shaking with rage, watched her struggle, watched her be beaten, watched Lucas suffer, standing by like spectators at a play, and Marcus rose and stepped toward her, stopping directly in front of her and placing both hands on her shoulders, his gaze burning with something she had never seen before, a deep, consuming fury on her behalf. And he told her that Derek Shaw would pay, that Vega would pay, each word spoken like a vow, promising her that the men who had done this to her would not escape. 1 week after learning the truth about Derek Shaw and Vega, Victoria decided to go to the hospital to visit Lucas as she did every day. His kidney transplant scheduled for the following week, and she wanted to be with him as much as possible before that moment arrived. 2 bodyguards accompanying her as usual, silent and watchful men whose presence she had gradually grown accustomed to, the black SUV pulling into the underground parking garage at Mount Sinai, as Victoria stepped out carrying the food she had prepared for Lucas, unaware of the white van parked nearby, unaware of the figures moving in the shadows, until it was too late, everything unfolding in seconds as a suppressed gunshot cracked the air, and the guard on her left dropped with a bullet hole in the center of his forehead, the other guard managing to draw his weapon before being struck unconscious from behind by a massive man wielding an iron bar, Victoria screaming and trying to run before a rough hand clamped over her mouth from behind, and the sharp stench of chemicals burned her nose, the world spinning as her legs gave way, and darkness swallowed her before she could think of Marcus, of Lucas, of anything at all. When Victoria came to, the first thing she felt was a pounding ache in her head, as if someone were striking her skull with a hammer. The second was the coarse rope biting into her wrists, raw and burning against her skin, her body sprawled on freezing concrete, in a pitch-black space, where only thin slivers of light slipped through gaps in a rusted metal roof, the stench of damp rot and old engine oil filling her lungs as she realized she was in an abandoned warehouse, struggling to sit up, her body trembling with cold and fear, her hands bound behind her back, her legs tied to the rusted feet of a metal chair, her mouth dry and bitter from whatever they had used to drug her, not knowing how long she had been unconscious, not knowing where she was, not knowing whether Marcus even knew she was missing. Footsteps echoed from somewhere in the distance, and Victoria felt her blood turn to ice, knowing she had faced fear before, had been beaten before, had thought herself close to death before, but this was different. This was not her drunken father, not Derek Shaw's enforcers teaching her a lesson. These were the people who had quietly destroyed her life for 4 years, the people who had murdered Marcus's father before his eyes, people who did not understand mercy. The metal door creaked open with a shrill groan and light spilled in, forcing Victoria to squeeze her eyes shut, and when she opened them again she saw 3 figures enter, the one in front, an older man with snow-white hair, eyes cold and reptilian, and a smile she knew would haunt her nightmares if she lived long enough to have them. "Victoria Sinclair," the man said, his voice gentle, as if greeting an old acquaintance. "At last we meet. I am Salvatore Vega, and you have something I want." Salvatore Vega dragged a wooden chair in front of Victoria, and sat down with the air of a man settling in to enjoy a meal, dressed in a dark gray suit and a pristine white shirt, as if he had come to a business meeting, rather than to interrogate a woman bound inside an abandoned warehouse. While behind him, Nina Castellano stood with her arms crossed, the smile on her lips wider than Victoria had ever seen it, as though this were the day she had been waiting for all along. Vega told her, in a voice gentle as one used with a child, that she knew why she was there, that it was because of Marcus Thorne, because she had lived in his house for nearly a month, had seen how he worked, heard private conversations, known the people he trusted, and that he wanted all of that information. Victoria met his gaze and forced her voice to remain steady despite her heart hammering wildly, saying she knew nothing and was only a waitress. And Vega let out a soft laugh devoid of any warmth, telling her not to underestimate herself, reminding her that she was the woman who had saved Marcus Thorne's life, the one he kept at his side instead of eliminating like every other witness, saying she was special and that special people always knew more than they admitted. He leaned forward, snake-like eyes drilling into her, asking what Marcus's weakness was, what he feared, whom he loved, whom he trusted most. Victoria remained silent, thinking of Marcus, of the night he spoke of his parents, of the way he looked at her when she cried, of his promise to protect her. Thinking of Lucas and the surgery approaching, of the future she had only just begun to dare to imagine, and she knew she would not betray Marcus, not because she loved him, though she no longer knew exactly what she felt, but because she was not that kind of person, because she had endured too much to become a traitor. She told Vega there was nothing she would say to him, her voice colder than she thought possible, and Vega sighed like a disappointed father dealing with a stubborn child, saying he had hoped she would cooperate, that it would have been much easier for her. then nodded toward Nina and said that his daughter could have her. Nina stepped up to Victoria, her eyes blazing with hatred, whispering whether she remembered what she had said at the plaza about betrayal and rejection, telling her she was about to learn that no one insulted the Vega family without paying the price, and the first slap snapped Victoria's head to the side as blood flooded her mouth. The second blow drove into her stomach and folded her over until she could not breathe. Nina, taking her time, savoring each strike, each cry of pain Victoria tried to swallow, each drop of blood from split lips and a broken nose, screaming at her to name Marcus's weakness. Victoria said nothing, because she had been here before. Not in this warehouse, but in this place inside her own mind. 6 years of her father's violence having taught her how to retreat inward, how to separate her mind from her body, how to endure pain without letting it break her, teaching her that physical pain had limits, that the body could withstand far more than people believed, and that the only thing they could take from her was what she allowed them to take, and she allowed them nothing. Nina beat her until her arms tired, until Victoria could barely recognize her own face beneath blood and swelling, while Vega sat and watched with the cold detachment of a man observing a performance that failed to impress him, finally remarking that she was more stubborn than he had expected, and that most people would have talked long before. Victoria lifted her swollen eyes to him and laughed, the sound hoarse with pain yet edged with defiance, asking if he truly thought he was the first man to beat her, telling him he knew nothing about her or what she had survived, that compared to her father, his Nina hit like a child. Vega's eyes narrowed, and for the first time Victoria saw something other than control in them, curiosity, and perhaps a trace of reluctant respect, as he asked whether she was truly this loyal to Marcus Thorne, a man she had known less than 2 months, and Victoria answered that she was loyal to no one, that she simply was not the kind of person who sold out others to save herself, telling him he could kill her but he would get nothing from her. Vega stood, brushing imaginary dust from his suit sleeve, and said they would see, that he had plenty of time, and that Victoria Sinclair had plenty of bones left to break. Victoria did not know how long she had been in the warehouse, time dissolving into a haze of pain between waves of interrogation and long stretches of abandonment, where she was left alone in the darkness with a body that no longer felt whole, losing consciousness again and again, waking again and again, and each time wondering if this awakening would be her last. Nina returning twice more, each time more brutal than before, yet still Victoria never opened her mouth, and she was hovering on the thin line between awareness and oblivion when gunfire erupted outside the warehouse, not a single shot but a barrage, like fireworks from hell, screams tearing through the air, footsteps pounding, glass shattering, metal crashing, and Victoria forced her swollen eyes open, able to see only through narrow slits, catching glimpses of figures running in chaos, Vega's men drawing their weapons and firing toward the entrance, falling one by one like dominoes. The steel door blasted open as Marcus Thorne stepped inside, nothing like she had ever seen him before. No immaculate 3-piece suit, no composed restraint, only a black jacket, a gun in his hand, and something on his face she had never seen on any man. Raw and primal rage, uncontrolled and absolute. Marcus moving through the warehouse like a storm, destroying everything in his path. One of Vega's men lunging from the shadows and falling to a shot fired without Marcus even turning his head, another trying to flee toward the back exit only to be stopped by Victor Kane appearing from nowhere. A bullet to the knee and then one to the head. Victoria witnessing it all through the fog of pain and exhaustion, knowing she should be terrified, should be sickened by the violence, yet feeling only relief. Such overwhelming relief that tears streamed down her face, stinging the open wounds on her skin. Nina Castellano attempting to escape only to be intercepted and slammed to the ground by Marcus's men. Salvatore Vega standing in the corner with a gun aimed at Marcus, his hand shaking, his eyes no longer cold and serpentine but filled with fear, the fear of a hunter who has suddenly become prey. Marcus not shooting him, only studying him for a moment before nodding to Victor Kane and saying to keep him alive and that he would deal with him later, then turning to Victoria as everything in him changed, the fury evaporating and replaced by something she could not name. Marcus rushing to her side, dropping to his knees on the filthy concrete without hesitation, his hands trembling as they touched her face, with a gentleness born of fear that she might shatter, saying her name in a voice that broke as he told her he was there, that he had come. Victoria trying to smile and wincing as cracked lips protested, whispering that he was a little late, Marcus cutting through her restraints with a folding knife, and then doing the one thing she had never expected, pulling her into his arms, holding her carefully yet tightly, as though she were the most precious thing in the world, and he was terrified of losing her. Victoria feeling his hot breath against her hair, feeling his heart racing through his jacket, feeling his body shaking despite his effort to control it. Marcus whispering into her hair that he thought he had lost her, that when they sent him the video of her being beaten he thought he would go mad, that he did not know when it happened, did not know when she had become so important that he could not imagine a world without her. And Victoria did not answer because she had no strength left to speak, resting her head against his chest, and, for the first time in days, feeling safe. 2 weeks after the rescue, Victoria lay in her private room in Marcus's penthouse, her body slowly mending, yet bruises still stamped across her skin like a map of suffering. Marcus had hired a private doctor to watch over her 24 hours a day, making sure she had everything she needed to heal, not only in body but in spirit. Lucas had undergone his kidney transplant successfully while she was being held captive, and he was recovering well at the hospital. For the first time in her life, Victoria felt as though things were finally moving in the right direction. Then Special Agent Richard Cole appeared. He came one afternoon while Marcus was out handling business, somehow slipping past the building's security and standing directly outside her door. He was a man of about 48, salt and pepper hair, a wrinkled gray jacket, and the exhausted eyes of someone who had chased criminals for too long without catching the one that mattered. "Victoria Sinclair," he said, holding up an FBI badge. "I am Special Agent Richard Cole, and we need to talk." Victoria sat up warily on the bed, her body tightening on instinct even though she knew this man did not intend to harm her, at least not in any physical way. She asked how he had gotten in. "The FBI has its ways," Cole replied, pulling up a chair beside her bed without waiting to be invited. He said he would get straight to the point, that he had been tracking Marcus Thorne for 12 years, 12 years of gathering evidence, building a case, and watching him walk away from every accusation because no one dared to testify against him. He fixed Victoria with a sharp look and told her she was the best opportunity he had had in a decade. Victoria said nothing and waited. He told her she had lived in Thorne's home for nearly 2 months, that she had witnessed him order Anthony Russo killed, that she had seen how he ran his empire, and that with her testimony Cole could put him in prison for at least 20 years. He set a thick file on her bed and said that in exchange the FBI would place her and her brother into witness protection, a new identity, a new life, somewhere no one could ever find her, and that she would be safe. Victoria, truly safe, not the counterfeit safety Thorne was providing. Victoria looked at the file without opening it, knowing it likely held proof of everything Marcus had done, every life lost at his command, every law he had trampled, and she was not naive about who Marcus was. She asked what happened if she refused. "Then you keep living in Thorne's world," Cole said, his voice hardening. "And when I catch him, because I will catch him, you will be treated as an accomplice, and you will go to prison with him." Victoria felt as if she were being torn in two, because one part of her, the part that had watched Marcus end a man's life with a simple nod, knew he deserved punishment under the law. Yet the other part, the part he had held in that warehouse, the part that had seen him break when he spoke of his parents, the part that had felt his hand tremble against her face, could not betray him. "You think you are offering me a choice," Victoria said slowly, "but you are forcing me to choose between conscience and loyalty, between right and wrong as you define them, between safety and something I have not even had time to name." She met Cole's eyes and told him she needed time to think. Cole stood, leaving the file on her bed. "You have 48 hours, he said, "and after that this offer expires." He paused at the door and told her to think carefully, that Marcus Thorne was a killer, and no love could change that. When Cole left, Victoria stared at the file on her bed as if it were a bomb with a ticking timer. 48 hours to decide, 48 hours to choose between the person she was becoming and the person she had once wanted to be. Victoria could not sleep that night, lying on her back and staring at the ceiling while the FBI file rested on the bedside table like a silent reminder of the decision she had to make. And when the sky finally began to pale with dawn, she rose, took the file, and went to find Marcus, who was seated in his office as if he too had not slept, steel gray eyes fixed on the Manhattan sunrise beyond the window. And when Victoria stepped inside, he turned, and his gaze fell immediately on the file in her hands, stating that the FBI had come to see her, not as a question but as a fact, and Victoria nodded and placed the file on the desk between them, telling him about Agent Cole and the offer to testify against him in exchange for witness protection for herself and Lucas. And Marcus studied the file briefly before looking up at her, and Victoria was startled to find no anger or sense of betrayal in his eyes, only weariness and something that looked like acceptance, as he told her in a low, even voice that she should take the deal, causing her to blink in disbelief and ask what he had just said. And Marcus rose and moved to the window with his back to her, saying that life with him would never be safe, that there would always be enemies and threats, and the risk of her being dragged into violence like what had happened with Vega, that she had endured enough and deserved peace. And Victoria stepped closer behind him, her heart racing with something she could not contain, asking whether he was sending her away. And Marcus turned back to her, and for the first time she saw true pain in those steel-gray eyes as he told her he was giving her the chance he could not give her in any other way, a normal life without blood or violence, that he could not change who he was, a man who ordered deaths and lived outside the law, and that staying with him meant accepting all of that. And Victoria replied steadily that she knew exactly who he was, that she had known since the night she watched him order Anthony Russo's death, that she had seen the darkness in him but also the way he broke when he spoke of his parents, the way he trembled when he held her in that warehouse, the way he looked at her as if she were something he feared losing. And she stepped closer until only a single pace separated them, telling him that her entire life she had never been given a choice, not when her mother died, not when her father beat her, not when debt crushed her, not when Derek Shaw and Vega destroyed her life from the shadows, but now for the first time she could choose, with the FBI offering one path and Marcus offering another. And she lifted her hand to his face, tracing the scar from his temple to his cheekbone, saying she chose to stay, not out of debt or fear or obligation, but because when he held her she had felt for the first time in years that she was not alone, because she loved him, Marcus Thorne, with all of his darkness and his light. And Marcus looked at her as the walls he had built over 20 years collapsed in an instant, his hand closing tightly over hers, as if afraid she would vanish, whispering that she was crazy. And Victoria smiled and answered that perhaps she was, but it was her choice. And Marcus kissed her, not gently or hesitantly, but deeply and fiercely, pouring everything he could not say into that kiss. And Victoria returned it, arms wrapped around his neck, feeling the promise in the way he held her, a promise to protect her, cherish her, and never let her be alone again. And when they finally parted, Marcus rested his forehead against hers and vowed that he would not let her regret this decision. And Victoria replied that she knew, adding calmly that now they had an enemy left to deal with. 1 week after Victoria made her decision, Marcus convened a meeting with every one of his closest confidants, Victor Kane, Julian Thorne, Diana Cross, and more than a dozen others gathered around the long conference table in a hidden room beneath the basement of a building in Brooklyn that Victoria had never known Marcus owned. Salvatore Vega was still being held at a secure, undisclosed location, yet his empire remained intact, still a threat that had to be eliminated completely. And Victoria sat beside Marcus, no longer merely an observer, because in the past days she had studied everything Marcus possessed on the Vega organization, from its hierarchy and business roots to its overlooked strengths and weaknesses, and the sharp observational eyes Marcus had once praised were now put to their true purpose, as she stood and pointed to the map on the wall and explained that Vega had 3 key lieutenants who did not trust one another, that after analyzing reports she had noticed that 2 of the 3 had secretly contacted rival mafia families over the past 6 months, and were waiting for an opportunity to betray Vega if given the slightest push. Marcus watching her with a mix of surprise and pride as he asked how she had uncovered it, and Victoria answering calmly that she read between the lines, that Marcus himself had taught her loyalty was the most fragile currency in that world, and she had simply looked for the cracks. The strike came 3 days later, and Marcus did not attack the Vega Empire head-on as everyone expected, instead following Victoria's analysis by approaching the 2 wavering lieutenants and offering them a deal, control of Vega territory in exchange for stepping aside and allowing Marcus to deal with their former boss. And without a single bullet fired, the Vega Empire collapsed from within, loyalists suddenly isolated as their allies turned against them. Marcus personally went to see Salvatore Vega in the room where he was being held, and Victoria went with him, not because she wished to witness death but because she needed to see the end of the man who had destroyed her life. Vega looking far older than the last time she had seen him, hair and beard gone white, eyes hollowed as though the collapse of his empire had drained the life from him, addressing Marcus with lingering arrogance by calling him the son of Alexander and claiming he had finally achieved what he wanted. Marcus replying coldly that Vega had killed his father, destroyed his mother, and stalked and tortured the woman he loved, that this was not about desire but about justice. Vega laughing dryly and saying there was no justice in their world, only the strong and the weak, that today Marcus was stronger but one day only to be cut off by Marcus telling him there would be no one day for him. Then nodding to Victor Kane as Victoria turned away when the gunshot echoed, not needing to see, only needing to know that the man who had shattered her life had finally paid the price. Nina Castellano was handed over to the FBI as a gift, along with enough evidence to put her behind bars for at least 20 years. And Agent Cole was far from pleased to learn Victoria had refused his offer, yet he could not complain when presented with a prize like Nina. But Victoria still had one last matter to settle. Derek Shaw was brought before her in another warehouse, gaunt and trembling, far weaker than the man who once threatened her, kneeling on the concrete floor with his hands bound behind his back, his eyes filled with the same fear she had endured for 4 long years as he cried and begged, claiming he had only followed orders and that Vega had forced him, that he had no choice. And Victoria looked down at the man who had turned her life into hell, who had beaten her in dark alleys, who had made her wake every night in terror, knowing she could order his death then and there. And Marcus had told her she had that right, yet she did not do it, telling him calmly that she would not kill him, that he would live, but he would live with this, every day wondering if it was his last, every footstep behind him, every shadow in the corner making him think of her, that he had taught her to live in fear for 4 years, and now it was his turn, and she turned and walked out of the warehouse, leaving Derek Shaw sobbing on the concrete floor, knowing it was the most perfect revenge she could imagine. Not a swift death, but a lifetime spent inside endless fear. 6 months after Salvatore Vega was eliminated, Victoria stood before the glass wall of her new office, looking down at the restless streets of Manhattan below, the sign by the door reading Thorne Security Consulting in gold letters against black, and she was still getting used to seeing her name tied to a legitimate business, something she had helped build with her own hands instead of merely surviving inside it. The idea having come from Marcus, who had turned her gift for observation and analysis into a real profession, a company that provided security consulting for businesses, risk assessments, and threat awareness training, clients unaware that its founder had once been an exhausted waitress, knowing only that Victoria Sinclair possessed eyes that saw through people and an instinct no one could teach. Lucas walked into the office with a bright smile, healthy and full of life in a way Victoria had not seen since before their mother died. The kidney transplant, a complete success, and he was now a first-year computer engineering student at New York University, a dream they had both thought was long buried, calling her name and hugging her as he told her he had finished his last exam with an A. And Victoria held her brother, feeling his strong body in her arms and fighting back tears, because this was everything she had ever wanted. Lucas alive, healthy, with a future, achieved by a path she never could have imagined. 2 years later, Victoria stood before the mirror in the penthouse dressing room that was now her home, smoothing the simple black dress Diana had chosen, Marcus having said they were going out to celebrate 2 years together, and she had no reason to doubt him, having learned to trust him, to trust their love, to trust the life they were building. And when the car stopped in front of a familiar restaurant, her heart skipped a beat. The Obsidian Room, where it had all begun, Marcus smiling at her surprise and taking her hand inside, the restaurant closed for the night, filled with candlelight and red roses. Marie Chen waiting at the door with the widest smile Victoria had ever seen, seated at the same corner booth, the most private table in the room, where she had served Marcus for the first time, where she had seen the red laser dot and chosen to save a stranger's life. Marcus asking if she remembered that night, and Victoria answering that she could never forget the night that changed everything. Marcus rising and her heart racing as he knelt beside her, drawing a small black velvet box from his jacket and opening it to reveal a diamond ring glittering in the candlelight, saying her name with a tremor he showed only to her, telling her she had saved his life that night, but had saved his soul every day after, teaching him that even in the darkest places there could be light, giving him a reason to be better, asking her to spend the rest of her life with him. Victoria crying tears of joy as she said yes without hesitation, Marcus sliding the ring onto her finger and kissing her in the empty restaurant where 2 years earlier she had been nothing more than a worn-down waitress with aching feet and a broken heart. That night, standing with him on the penthouse balcony overlooking Manhattan, Victoria thought of her journey. She thought of the 12-year-old girl who lost her mother, the victim of abuse, the woman barely surviving. She looked at who she was now, loved, respected, and truly living, instead of merely existing. She had learned that sometimes the best things come from the most unexpected places. Love can grow even in darkness, that you do not have to be perfect to deserve happiness. Sometimes, a single instinctive decision can change an entire life. The girl who saw a red dot on a stranger's collar and chose to act had found what she never dared dream of, a family, a purpose, and a love that defied judgment. The greatest stories do not begin with once upon a time. They begin with a moment that changes everything. And the story of Victoria Sinclair was proof of that. Her story with Marcus had reached its happy ending, but its lesson endured. Life is not always fair, and often pushes us into darkness, but it is there we discover our true strength. Courage is not the absence of fear, but action in spite of it. Love is not finding perfection, but embracing light and shadow together. And if this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel, smash that like button, and share this video to help spread meaningful stories. We bring you new journeys and emotions every day, and would be honored to have you with us. We invite you to share your own moments where a single choice changed everything in the comments below. Your stories inspire us. Thank you for watching. We wish you health, joy, and peace. Remember, no matter how dark life becomes, there is always light at the end of the tunnel, just as Victoria found hers. Until we meet again in the next video,